Hello, Ritochka. I always introduce you to all my acquaintances, friends, and patients as the magical Rita. But let's tell you a little about yourself, about the different parts of yourself, because in one person, you actually combine a lot of tools for working with yourself, with your psychology, subconscious, and so on.
Hello, dear Julia. Everyone who watches this podcast, I would like to start with gratitude. It was a sudden offer to just meet online and talk, and it really resonated with me. I always respond to any initiatives that come from you because we have good contacts. In general, our communication has been going on for years. If you want me to talk about myself, I truly accept that. This wonderful term magical, I can definitely try it on for myself, wear it. And maybe that's a good place to start talking about me. I am a woman who is happy to live her own life. I can't say that I've had that ultimate insight or figured out the secret to happiness, the meaning of life, or anything like that. But I am definitely on the way. I am in good contact with my self-worth, with my body and emotions. I find life interesting. I'm interested. I really love my work. I even hesitate to call it work. It's the best thing in the world, and it also brings in a good income. Professional faith. In a nutshell, I combine psychology and spiritual practices. In scientific terms, this is called transpersonal coaching. Yes, transpersonal is about changing states, and the point of this process is to move into a different perception of yourself and the world, not the one you're used to. It's about looking at yourself with different eyes. A big role here is also given to the processes that happen to us on the subconscious level. This could go on endlessly. Maybe there are some questions you'd like to ask. By the way, I was remembering how we met, how you first, so to speak, got to my face, and how you introduced me to this world of beauty, I guess probably in your professional terms. I'm probably a wild client because I very rarely go to cosmetologists, or really to any kind of procedures at all. You could probably say that I'm a woman hopelessly stuck in the last century when it comes to modern technologies. But out of the 3.5 times I've ever been to a cosmetologist in my life, 3 of those times were in your office. In fact, I even smiled this morning, remembering. I got curious and dug into my own database. You know, it all started when I asked you for your birth details as precisely as possible, including your time of birth, because I wanted to check our compatibility. Astrology was actually the deciding factor here, because there are plenty of great professionals out there, people who do their job well. But for me, it's really important that I align with a particular specialist or expert in terms of moral and ethical qualities, in terms of values. And in this regard, you and I'm actually looking at your horoscope right now on my second computer. I clearly remember telling you that one of your purposes, your destiny, is to make things beautiful for people, but through pain. That is Mars in Libra in the 6th house. In plain language, Mars means needles. Pain, Libra, beauty, aesthetics. The 6th house is work. And there is also what's called the karmic nerve node there. So you were involved in this. And this node is about carrying certain tendencies from the past with us. In other words, it seems you've been doing this for more than one lifetime. And there are all sorts of other things as well, like Venus conjunct Proserpina. Also, to put it in plain language, Venus is beauty, Proserpina is healing. There she is, the medicine woman. All of this is also in Scorpio, transformation. Among other things, it's not just about external transformation. It's about some deep processes that are set in motion. Of course, I don't know, you have a different perception. Of course, you could ask why you do what you do, but
Actually, what you said about helping women see themselves differently really resonated with me. We're basically doing the same thing, just using slightly different tools. My main goal, mission, and desire is to help women see themselves differently and truly love themselves. It's just that I do it through things like injections, lasers, or procedures, while you do it through working with the subconscious, psychology, astrology, and so on. And actually, what I wanted to talk about most today is how much these 2 approaches really need to work together. Because I very often encounter this situation when absolutely stunningly beautiful women, girls come to see me, You look at them and she's just gorgeous, but she doesn't love herself at all. And she's ready to completely change and remake herself. And she has a desperate desire to change something about herself. And when I look at patients like that, I realize that, in fact, they shouldn't be coming to me, because no matter how many procedures I do for them, even if they're absolutely wonderful procedures, I still won't be able to help them love themselves, which is my main goal. So I want to ask you, from a psychological perspective, why does a person even develop this desire to change something?
I guess we can start with what comes to mind first. The desire for change. It's a natural state of our psyche. It's a need for growth, for discovery, for some kind of change, for expansion. It's about exploring yourself, seeing what else you can be, what you can change in yourself, and even improve. Basically, this is a natural desire. It's normal. But here, it's also important to consider the state we're in when we pursue it. If it comes from a place of lack, neediness, or dissatisfaction, then of course it can lead to outcomes and consequences that are completely different from what we originally expected. As a result, the effects may not align with our initial hopes. Or when a person lacks self-connection and inner support and instead relies on external factors or authorities, there is a substitution of core models. Yes, and we all know these stories about how trends dictate certain actions, what fashion is, especially among women. A good connection lives with the reptilian brain. These are the deepest layers of our psyche. And what's there? There we have tribal feelings of instinct. Instincts. How was it before? If the tribe didn't accept you, if you were somehow different, it was equal to death if you were rejected. In today's world, it still manifests in some way. If I'm somehow different, not like everyone else, if I don't follow fashion, if I don't have a certain, appearance or a certain status, certain, attributes of this country, then it feels like I'm not safe. Even though survival isn't really an issue, we're perfectly capable on our own, on some deep, unconscious layers, we still have this ingrained response to follow that tribal feeling. That's why, in principle, even unnatural processes are, in a way, natural too. What could here and
how can we even tell where that fine line is when the desire to become better is about growth, development, and a resource for us? And when does it become self-rejection or some kind of inner pain that we're trying to cover up with external attributes?
Well, the word resource was mentioned in the question. You
taught me.
The word resource was in the question, and right after it comes its synonym, energy. And probably for me at least, the answer is how to distinguish it is by how much energy there is behind what I do. Maybe, again, how do we understand this? Whether we're observing from the outside or trying to assess why this is happening to us right now. Probably in our case, it involves self-analysis, asking ourselves, why am I doing this? What feelings does this bring me? In general, like any action, according to psychology, there is always a need being satisfied behind this goal. That is to achieve some kind of emotional state. Why am I doing this? Or what is my goal? That is, on the surface, to look beautiful, to get a job, and so on. But on deeper, more subtle emotional levels, there is something behind it. To be loved, to be accepted. The issue of safety. To gain some advantages in life or something else. And that's normal. But when it takes on a somewhat unhealthy character, when we're not really, so to speak, in control, when we get carried away, when in the end, after achieving this result, we suddenly realize that we need more. Or I don't know, have you ever had a situation where after a procedure, the client sees that something else needs to be fixed or they're not satisfied? Or if I can share, or I'll tell you now and you can just cut it out later. I remember something like that. It was a few years ago. I come to see you exactly once every 2 or 3 years, and I think it wasn't this last appointment, but the one before that. I overheard a conversation. You were talking to a client who insisted that she needed to either get an injection or something else in a different amount than what you were suggesting. I was so impressed by your tone of communication, how you handled it, saying, "Excuse me, but you're not really assessing this situation accurately right now. This would be harmful for you. It's not hard for me to do it. It's money for me." But right now, I'm actually thinking about completely different things. I mean, the way you handled it, I don't know if it was a young woman or an older one, but that moment really made me respect you a lot. The way you responded was really beautiful. I mean, how does a cosmetologist refuse to perform a procedure simply because it would be excessive?
I actually face this kind of dilemma very often. This is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about this topic. Because patients come in and there are people who have had just one procedure, saw the result, and they're so happy. And I can literally see how their lives change, how women start dressing up, putting on makeup, going out, meeting new people, and even thinking that maybe they should look for a better job. So for them, this cosmetic procedure acts like a magic push to start living their best life. And then there are patients for whom you've already done everything. And clinically, you look and you realize that everything that could be done has already been done. The result is very good, but it's still not enough for the patient. It's as if the patient doesn't see the progress made, devalues what we've achieved, and is still dissatisfied. They just can't stop. They want one procedure after another. And I realize that it's not because they're looking in the mirror, but it's something inside them. Something makes them want to keep getting more and more procedures. In fact, this is a huge problem in the cosmetology industry, both in New York and not just in New York, where patients, I don't know, want even bigger cheeks, even bigger lips, even more procedures of some kind. They actually don't need it, but providers can't refuse them. And honestly, for me as a business owner, this is often a real dilemma because patients come in and say, here's the money, do the procedure for me. But I can't take that money because I understand that this procedure won't be beneficial for them and might even be harmful. Even though we live in a material world and we all need and want to earn money, this is just beyond me, and I would never do it. I would never perform a procedure on a patient that they simply don't need.
That's why I only go to a cosmetologist once every 2 years, like when we were in New York. You know, to call things by their names, maybe I'm also one of those examples you described. When a person gets a procedure, it lasts a long time and they're very satisfied. So I believe that in my case, integration is important, truly understanding things, meaning, in addition to you explaining everything very thoroughly and professionally, what, how, and why. But I believe that a person needs to be in a certain emotional state, because our internal psycho-emotional state directly affects not only our face, but our whole body, our ability to relax. In psychology, there's actually a concept called neuroplasticity. That is how flexible and adaptable our mind is. And this directly affects our lives. This also affects how our body experiences things, how it perceives certain situations, including those related to beauty and wellness. What you described is a typical sign that a woman is out of touch with herself, or that her emotions are blocked, that there are some suppressed feelings. And through this process, doing something else for yourself, loving yourself a little more. This sends us back to certain childhood periods and to some deep trauma that may have happened in the past. And this lack of sensitivity, it's often hard for a person to admit their imperfections or accept their age or some other personal traits. You want to hide that behind a mask. This lack of self-acceptance gives rise to a whole bunch of stories that a person gets involved in. And maybe they never get the chance to truly discover themselves, to see what they could potentially be, to be happy. But on a larger scale, this is really about the practice of mindfulness. You
know, it's so interesting how you talked about the state of mind, about how it affects everything. This is something I've noticed in my own practice. The attitude a patient brings to a procedure, the state they're in, affects both their results and the healing process. I can perform the exact same procedure on 2 different patients and they'll have completely different results. And sometimes the only difference is how they approach it. A patient comes in and says, you're going to do this for me now and everything will be great. Everything will be awesome. And it really does turn out great. It really is awesome. And the patient heals quickly without any problems and gets the maximum result, even from a single intervention. But sometimes it's the opposite, when a patient has already done everything possible and impossible. And then there's our term Debbie Downer. when no matter what you do for her, she's still dissatisfied, even though she actually has results. The results are less visible, less striking, simply because she herself doesn't believe in it, simply because that's her own attitude. And I've been observing this for a long time. And I say, it always seems to me that maybe I'm just imagining things, but in practice, it turns out I'm not. And from a psychological perspective, you can also comment on this.
Yes, I am certain that there is a direct connection between our inner state and how the end can be reflected in our actions, including when we undergo cosmetic procedures or when we do sports or when we do something else, even things that aren't physically visible, like, for example, achieving certain professional goals. I'm
looking at the questions my followers have sent me, and one of the questions goes like this: how can you learn to be kinder to yourself if you have an inner critic? This really resonates with me because, well, as you already know, I'm a maximalist and a perfectionist myself. So really, how do you learn to be softer, kinder, and accept yourself more?
For some reason, I want to start with something that might be interesting to you and to those watching us now, how psychotherapy explains the word karma. There's a direct connection between my answer to this question and that concept. Psychotherapy defines what we commonly call karma as those programs, settings, deep-seated beliefs, certain imprints, marks, and rules that we agreed to and accepted as our own frame of reference at a fairly early age. And we sort of play by these rules. And the earlier these were formed, then the less aware we are of why we act this way, why we have such a reaction. You might want in your mind to love yourself differently, but then you slip up again and do something wrong. Again, you didn't love yourself, you berated yourself, criticized yourself, and so on. Continuing on answering your question about critics, there are different parts of our psyche living within us. These are different, the professional term is subpersonalities. That is, the experience of interacting with someone significant is usually imprinted. When we engage in self-criticism, it indicates that in the past there was some kind of traumatic experience or a habitual pattern of interaction with a significant adult who was critical. Moreover, if we dig deeper into why this happens, most often when someone criticizes us or when we feel the urge to criticize, say, our own children, it is an unconscious impulse to put our own shadow parts into the child, as if into a container, like a black box. Since a child's psychological defenses don't work yet in childhood, in other words, there's no critical thinking. For a child, an important adult is like God. A mother is an entire universe. A parent's word is law. It's only later, in adolescence, that we start to rebel, to ask questions, to wonder if things are really the way they seem, to doubt. But when a child is small, they're told, this is black, this is white, girls don't cry. This is how it is, be better, you're not doing enough. And look at our neighbor's daughter, she's doing great, but what about you? And this slowly seeps into the subconscious. And then, coming back to the term karma, if we don't intentionally or deliberately do something about it, if we go to therapy, for example, or if something doesn't happen, like a very serious stress, war, COVID, some kind of major emergency relocation or something else, it's practically impossible to change this. That is, if a person doesn't become mindful and start looking within, it's really very difficult to change. This mode of inadequacy, of imperfection, that inner critic, the grandmother janitor who since childhood would scold you for walking on a freshly cleaned floor at school, will keep buzzing in your head all the time. So what can you do? You can either go into some kind of deep work or start by exploring and asking yourself questions. There's a great coaching question. Where, when, and with whom have I experienced something like this before? Whose voice is it that I'm hearing in my head right now? And excuse me, are these even my feelings? And my favorite questions. Right now I'm feeling this, self-dislike, self-criticism. And then you ask yourself, how would I like to feel if I could overcome something? How would I like to feel about myself? I
really like this practice. You once talked about it, about putting up reminders everywhere that you're beautiful. And to look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourself this. And, I actually recommend this practice to a lot of my patients. And those who really do it say that it works.
I'll explain how it works. From a popular science perspective, our brain doesn't care who gives the treat. Where does dopamine come from? Whether someone else praises you or you praise yourself. But because at first some pretty tough defenses kick in, like, you're so beautiful, have you seen yourself in the mirror? At first, the brain isn't used to it. It's new information. We're used to seeing ourselves as somehow lacking. I actually recommend sticking a note where you most often, like, I don't know, when you brush your teeth in the morning, where you see your reflection. Just repeat these phrases. Usually, how does it go over time? For a new habit to form and the old one to dissolve, thank you. It takes about 40 days. If you do it for 4 months. But really, what are new habits? They are new neural connections. For them to become established, it's actually a chemical and biological process. Neural connections need to be coded with protein, with myelin, and that takes from 4 to 18 months. It's just like when we do squats. Thank you.
And can cosmetology, as well as a variety of different self-care procedures and routines, actually become an important and meaningful part of this kind of psychological support or assistance in daily life?
Absolutely, yes. For example, I use it for this very purpose. That is, when I open the door to a spa or to a cosmetologist's office, I set myself up right then and there. All this time that I spend here, it's all for me. In other words, being in the role of a patient or a client is very healing for me. But again, when I go into this space for a massage or when I come to you for procedures, I bring all my attention here. I take it from everywhere else right here, right now. Not thinking about what it's for or that something is imperfect or about any issues or problems. If you are fully present in your body, or at least try to be in the moment, plus, of course, a certain mindset, there will definitely be
a result. For me, it's more about self-care. When I go to the gym, for example, I don't really like it. I don't really enjoy it there, to be honest. But I understand, I set my mind to the fact that I'm doing this for my body, for my health, so that my back doesn't hurt, so that in 20 years I can still lead an active lifestyle. And when I set myself up this way, first of all, it's easier for me to go through this experience. And secondly, I really see better results. This is a very interesting point. And I've really started to program myself this way. I'm working out there. I enjoy it. It's good for me. And really, over time, when it becomes a habit, it gets easier. And now it's the opposite for me. If I don't go to the gym, I'm like, oh, my back hurts. My back feels tight. I should stretch. I should do something. And actually, when it comes to self-love, I think self-love is also a habit. I think it's something you can develop as well.
I even have a stage like that.
With this habit, I think you need to help yourself however you can, both from a psychological and a cosmetological perspective. And sometimes when my patients come in and say, oh, I need to do something about this or that, I tell them, listen, I'll just call your husband right now and tell him to give you more compliments because everything is fine with you and you're just being too hard on yourself. And if you don't stop talking yourself down, I'll have a word with the people around you because I think you're just not getting enough compliments.
Yes, as they say, Carlson, happiness isn't in pies.
Yes, yes. But it really does work. How important is the specialist themselves, the one who changes the face, its features, their aura, their manner of speaking? Can this somehow affect the patient's self-esteem and in general their journey in cosmetology and towards self-love?
Here I see a direct and immediate influence because on the subconscious level, we interact with each other, not only verbally, but we also send each other certain subtle impulses subconsciously. These impulses are exchanged without us even being fully aware of them. When a client comes to a cosmetologist who is in good contact not only with their professional side, but also with their own internal psychological processes and inner resources for work, they treat their patients in an environmentally conscious and respectful way. Of course, this will have a direct impact because it's just like the relationship from one person to another. And when the cosmetologist is confident that their client will achieve the most wonderful, the very best results, including overcoming insecurity. I've noticed this. When a woman who isn't very confident comes to you, she leaves with a much greater sense of self-worth, with a different, more subtle attitude, with permission, with self-confidence. As they say, it's your face. Not only do you have to put it on, you also have to wear it properly. That is the right attitude towards this system of our values and, again, beliefs. I actually believe that a cosmetologist, just like a psychologist, can break the spell of this karmic conditioning of what we believe in and how everything works inside us, how we've lived within ourselves. And on the other hand, if a specialist devalues or pressures or they need to meet some standards or something else, like in New York, you have insurance requirements, or they need to sell some products that are about to expire. But even if this isn't shown outwardly, it is still picked up on a physical level, on a subtle level. It is still sensed. That's why definitely
In fact, I very often hear from patients, well, again, unfortunately, most of the procedures I perform are not the most pleasant. And after going through this procedure, patients look at me and say, oh my God, Julia, I would never have agreed to do this procedure if it weren't for you. With you, I felt safe. But going to the same procedure, even though I like it, with someone else, I can't even imagine it. And of course, it's very nice for me to hear all this. So from a psychological perspective, how should a patient choose the right specialist for themselves? For example, okay, you have great tools, you checked my astrology, looked at my chart, and saw that I'm probably in the right place. But what about someone who doesn't have those tools? Thank you. Specifically from a psychological standpoint, how can a person understand if this is their specialist or not? How do you find the right person, the right specialist who will truly work in your best interests?
As a psychologist who works with the unconscious, I truly believe that nothing in our lives happens just by chance. Sometimes we even have negative experiences with, say, specialists or experts in certain fields. We need them for a reason. To answer your question of how, through practice. That is, when we get certain results or don't get them, we simply become more attentive to what works better for us, to why we choose one specialist over another. Of course, you can do this through dialogue. You can also set yourself up from the start to listen. What kind of response do I feel? Of course, the best advertisement is word of mouth. When someone recommends a specialist, when you see the results your friend has achieved, or hear opinions that matter to you. Especially when you see not only how it affected their appearance, but also how it impacted them emotionally. And perhaps it's really worth developing, thank you, this sense of connection with your own body. And besides the fact that it's really important to choose the right specialist, I feel like I'm not the best example. They've already discussed that I rarely and very consciously go to a cosmetologist. But what I could recommend is to really ask yourself, why do I need this? What is my intention? This is also about mindfulness, about being in touch with your own life. And of course, it's very important to maintain a balance between self-care and becoming dependent on this endless race to become better. That's
extremely important, especially nowadays. Very often patients come to me and show me a photo of themselves, but with a filter, and say, I want to look like this. In this era of social media, with photoshopped pictures and filters, people have stopped perceiving their real selves, and they want to look like some celebrity from a magazine cover, even though in reality, even the celebrity doesn't look like that in real life. And this balance is probably very important. But what I try to explain to my patients is that for me, the state you're in is what matters. Do you feel better after this procedure? Do you love yourself more after this procedure? Do you accept yourself more after this procedure? Honestly, I also came into this profession because of not accepting myself. I really didn't like my appearance at all, especially in my early 20s. I just couldn't accept myself. If I had been given free rein back then, I probably would have, I don't know, cut off my face and sewn on a new one. And for me, it was a journey toward myself. I can say with 100% certainty, for example, that cosmetology helped me accept and love myself. Of course, there's no limit to perfection, especially for perfectionists like me. Even now, if you ask me what I don't like about myself, I could name at least 50 things. But again, what I've realized both in cosmetology and in life in general is that it's very important not to devalue the path we've already taken. I mean, of course, there's always room for improvement, but if I compare myself today to who I was 10 years ago, I realize that I look better now. not only do I look better, but my overall state is much better. And that's exactly what I want to pass on to my patients as well.
What I hear here is that you're talking about maturity. The more maturity you have, the fewer extremes there are. Then there is awareness. There is a desire to change something in yourself, not out of panic or this kind of crazy anxiety, but out of interest, mindfulness, and a good connection with yourself. Not because something needs to be fixed, but because it feels good to take care of yourself. That way, our transformations probably happen in a more harmonious way. It was great how you mentioned the influence of social media at the beginning. It's true, and I completely agree. Yes, what about you? It's important to remember that on social media, people don't show reality. And what we see is not reality, but a well-edited picture or video. When we compare ourselves to something so polished and artificial, it will always be a losing game. It was really great how you shared your own example too. I'm giving that back to you. It's wonderful to compare yourself to your past self to see your progress, with the goal of seeing your own progress. And I also want to say something about social media. Of course, it's quite a challenge where people realize there's a dependency. It's just like dragging yourself off the couch, going to the gym, putting your phone aside and doing something else, like picking up a book. A supportive environment is also very important. If you follow someone on social media, that person should be real to you, or you should understand that what they share truly aligns with your values. This will guide you, it will support you psychologically, rather than making you fall into feelings of inadequacy or even dependency. So, of course, we're talking about building your own internal sources of support. And I believe there's nothing shameful about wanting to do certain procedures. Personally, I'm not a supporter for certain reasons. But I support women who want to take care of themselves, get Botox, or try all sorts of modern things and technologies. Nowadays, there are so many options, especially high-quality ones that have been tested and researched. But what really matters is the state we're in when we do it.
And speaking of state, I have clients in my practice. Actually, it's not just one or two cases. It's not rare. There are quite a few people who come in and are already getting certain procedures done. But for example, when I suggest that they look in the mirror or show them their own before and after photos, they're not ready to do it. They can't look at themselves. They don't want to see their photos. Like, I just don't even want to see. So why does this happen? Why is it so hard for some people to even admit to themselves that they don't accept themselves that much? And in general, what should be done about it? For example, what would you advise me as a cosmetologist to do with such patients? Because I genuinely want to help them, not just with an injection, but with this state of mind.
Yes, you've just described an interesting mechanism here. I'll comment on it from a psychological perspective. There is the self, and then there is the inner image of oneself. And most likely, this inner image, which feels inadequate, doesn't change that quickly. Or our brains simply can't keep up with the changes. Even if the appearance changes, the old scenario can remain in the subconscious. I'm not enough. There's something wrong with me. And in the end, one of the brain's main properties or tasks is to maintain homeostasis, that is, some kind of psychological balance. And accordingly, why do changes happen so slowly and with such resistance? Why does it require some kind of a long period of time for us to develop a new habit? It's because of this function of the brain. And when changes occur, a person continues to feel like the same person. And again, in my view, this goes back to childhood, to some deep-seated experiences. This may even be perhaps some kind of post-traumatic process of accepting oneself. At some point, someone, I don't know, didn't accept the child. So without working through these beliefs, let's say, external changes won't bring complete satisfaction. There definitely can be a result, I think. But also, in a way, both the cosmetologist and the psychologist play the role of a very significant person in one's life at this moment. And what is the essence of therapy? It's that we learn to communicate differently with an adult who is important to us. In other words, we rewrite our old childhood scripts. I can quite imagine that the same thing can happen with a cosmetologist. That is when your specialist speaks from their expertise with a solid sense of self, relying on their knowledge and experience, and tells you that you're okay. We're doing this for such and such reasons, and now you're allowed to perceive yourself differently. Relying on this new type of communication, a person develops their own inner support. That's why I'm more than sure that they leave you as slightly different people. Yes, sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes there are such strong blocks suppressing sensitivity that a person denies it, simply can't look at it because the psyche can't live with the conflict. It gets suppressed and goes very deep. There's actually another topic here, but it's already from body-oriented therapy. When I work with one of the techniques for exploring and processing certain issues through the unconscious, called a shamanic journey, there is often an effect where a person suddenly starts to feel some pain, or suddenly their jaw locks up somewhere. Or there's a sensation in the chest, like tightness, for example. This doesn't mean that some kind of tension or block appeared during the process. On the contrary, something was released. The person began to feel what is actually happening. But for various reasons, because emotions were suppressed, the sensations also go deep into certain layers. When we bring these layers to the surface, maybe in this sense, even those painful procedures you described also have a therapeutic effect. For me,
it's very interesting that you started talking about this, because situations immediately came to mind where during painful procedures, my patients would start crying or have some kind of hysterical reaction. I say, I hurt you. They say, no, you're doing everything right. In those moments, I realized that it was some kind of internal pain that had surfaced. Yes.
Compensation.
And these physical sensations of pain, it's as if they were truly experiencing their inner pain and letting it out.
Yes.
When you mentioned it just now, it really came up for me. And also, well, I can't say it happens very often, but I've had situations like that, especially when my patients are under pronox, sometimes these internal tensions, because the body relaxes, the mind relaxes, and what is usually kept under control can actually come out. And at that moment, in fact, a lot of patients express gratitude because it was precisely in that vulnerable moment when something was coming up and I was there to guide them through the experience.
There are actually a lot of other factors here. Look, I mean, they put their trust in you, knowing that the procedure will be painful. That's already something new. It's about opening up in your vulnerability. It's about other layers that might come up, allowing yourself to be weak, allowing yourself to be real in this moment, to lean on you, even literally, physically. You put your hand on them. I remember it well, yes, or you give some kind of suggestion and it's perceived differently, or there's a certain mood. In other words, the state is definitely transmitted. So, as they say, choose your specialist wisely. And I know for sure that cosmetology is not just for me. It's one of the great ways to change your inner state, because taking care of yourself can give us a sense of joy, of control, in the good sense of the word, and become an important moment of self-care. When we turn to ourselves, how does it usually go? Our attention is always somewhere else. When I come to you as if to a temple. Now, when I come to the temple, my mindset is that all the time I spend here is just for me. I will receive. I've already made an agreement with myself. I know that I will get not only an effect, but I will also get a good emotion, and I will leave with it and it will stay with me for a very long time. Well, of course, here we can work with our emotions, beliefs, and self-image. And if you combine this nowadays, a lot of people are turning to therapy, psychology, other practices, and meditation. In other words, they are learning to work with their own state. And I think cosmetology, as one type of body-oriented therapy, can deliver really great results. Why is that? Because we work with sensitivity. Do you understand what I mean? You mentioned it yourself. Some pain is released and attention is directed. So in fact, all these years I was in pain, but I just suppressed it. And now I feel safe, yes, with this specialist, with this person, with a woman who has also gone through this experience. And as far as I know, you share very openly, without hiding your vulnerabilities, what you went through, how you changed yourself. This adds a lot of value to coming back to you every time. That's result.
When people laugh and say, Julia, you like to hurt people. Yeah, right. That even hurts because I don't like hurting people, not at all. But I feel the pain and I know for sure that I can guide people through it. I can be a support in that pain and on that path. So no, I don't like causing pain, but I have to.
Yeah. But you do it really well. Right now I opened it again, looking at your chart, just enjoying it, because there's a lot of Scorpio influence. You can check forecasts not only for Libra, you can also look at Scorpio.
100%.
You know how to put it? Sometimes you can see in a horoscope if a person has the authority to give advice, to be a judge for others. And so that's why I came to you at the time, looking at your chart. Then, after talking more, of course, asking questions and feeling a response in my body. You really do have a great quality. You have the right to. You were born this way. People don't become like this. They're born like this. You have the right, including because you yourself have gone through an incredible transformational experience. Through pain, through change, you reached a new level of self-awareness. A connection with your body, with your life. You're basically a walking advertisement for how things can be, including for your own brand. Leszeczka.
Since we've already started talking about astrology, let's wrap up our podcast with this interesting question. Astrology. I know, for example, patients who, even I, for instance, am like this. If I want my hair to grow, I only get haircuts during the waxing moon. I remember you once came to see me and you said that Venus was in some planet, so it was necessary to...
So that it wouldn't be retrograde, right? All those old wives' tales.
Tell me, please, where can an average person check which day they should, I don't know, get their lips done or have a laser treatment? Or can they just write to you with that kind of question? And in general, Lida, what kinds of questions can people come to you with? Because my followers already know what kinds of questions they can come to me with. And I'd like you to also share at the end what kinds of questions people can come to you with, because you have so many tools at your disposal that I can't even list them all.
Yes, I'll tell you. You know, first I want to say this. Any given system works if we believe in it. In other words, it matters which frame of reference you live in. If you allow for the idea that astrology works, you notice you pay attention to the fact that you feel differently during changes in the lunar cycles. Maybe you experience some things like changes in your sleep, or maybe increased emotionality, or on the contrary, the opposite. Or during Mercury retrograde, curse it, everyone already knows this trend. The green one that's widely circulating. It's clear that there are certain things you should or shouldn't do. And at one time, yes, I kind of believe in it. For me, it works. You can also look at this and explain it in more psychological terms. When we live in such an unstable, turbulent time, when it seems like the world has gone mad, civilization is going through yet another very difficult stage, what can we rely on? Often we can no longer rely on the usual things. And here, of course, astrology and certain subtle aspects of the self come to the rescue. Others are not only mantic, but also meditative, more religious systems, already in a modern context, that help us find support. Astrology is not a panacea, it's not the answer to all questions, but at the very least, it can provide that very support, much like when your patients come to you. In the same way my clients come to me. People turn to astrology when they want to expand, to go beyond their usual perception of their life. I'm used to seeing things only this way. But what if I play a game where I'm not just a Libra, but also a bit of a Scorpio? So to what extent can I then dare, and what can I allow myself? In other words, it's about setting slightly different rules for the game. It's the same when it comes to asking yourself certain questions with my help in order to train this new perception of reality, a new strategy, a new model of behavior. This is exactly how you start to connect with your adult self. Remember, there was a question I didn't fully answer, and now I'd like to comment a bit more on it, about the inner critic. So we get rid of that old gatekeeper lady, but there's a reason for the saying, whichever wolf you feed, that's the one that will grow. Accordingly, the antidote to the critic is to nurture this supportive, healthy part of yourself that totally accepts and approves of you, where there's plenty of room for self-worth. By the way, self-worth is also a great topic. I'm actually exploring it a lot myself right now. There's a huge demand for this. Very often, our sense of self-worth is something that's far off in the future. When I achieve that doctorate degree, or when I become a mom, then I'll feel valuable, or when I build that business, or when I get that face for myself. It's like a postponed set of life circumstances, a deferred life. But that's a big illusion. Again, it's just our limiting belief. In reality, nothing separates us from our self-worth right now. Self-worth is a very important part of an ideal resourceful state on which everything in our life depends. Since we've already discussed that the brain is like a monkey with a grenade, which, along with that nagging old lady, takes over the steering wheel and criticizes everything, what can we do in the moment? Be more attentive. But how? If you can't handle it on your own, reach out to someone who has gone through this experience, who has certain tools, who can remind you that things can be different. And of course, I strongly believe in the power of the subconscious. We have such incredible, amazing resources in the deeper layers of our psyche, but we simply don't realize that we can access and use them. And many processes in our lives also happen intuitively, whether in a positive or negative way. When we start interacting with our subconscious, there are different methods for that. For example, I practice the method of active imagination by Carl Gustav Jung, which is also called the shamanic journey. But honestly, the only thing shamanic about it is the name. It's more psychotherapy than a shamanic practice. So what's the life hack here? Our subconscious speaks to us in the language of a small child. It's the language of fairy tales, myths, and archetypes. When you tell your subconscious, I want to get married or I want money, it doesn't really work that way. So you need to learn to join in this game, to learn to speak this language. Explore yourself by, so to speak, shifting your so-called assemblage point, your focus of perception. Of course, you're always welcome to come and observe, or you can follow along on social media. I often hold various offline events as well as online ones.
A lot of my patients ask me about women's retreats. I always give them your contact information. And there are a lot of requests to start holding retreats for English speakers. So Rita, I'm really looking forward to it because there's already a line waiting.
Thank you.
I'll definitely include all the relevant links to your account for you right under our video and with a full
description
of what people can reach out to you for. I'm very grateful to you for today's conversation. Actually, it wasn't meant for me, but it turned out to be very useful for me. You know, it's so interesting when we do something supposedly for someone else's benefit, but in reality, we end up benefiting ourselves. I always say, when my patients are happy, I feel ecstatic. Yes.
Of course, for me,
it's worth more than money. I mean, I want to bring them benefit, but in reality, sometimes I feel happier than they do. And just like after today's broadcast, I wanted to make a useful episode for my patients, but in fact, I got a lot out of it for myself. If you want to add anything.
When we do something for someone else, that's also a great point. Why it's beneficial to be a good person, to love other people. And doing something for others is more about connecting with your own mission. But behind all of this, in a good way, there is still our own hidden benefit. By doing something for others, I'm still fulfilling some of my own needs. I feel great. I enjoy it when, after the retreat, the women in their crowns, all dressed in red, fired up, suddenly start acting differently. They breathe differently, move more smoothly. What emotions are happening at that moment? You saw it yourself recently. I just bathe in that energy. In many ways, I do these retreats for myself as well. That's exactly how today's broadcast happened too. Because it also has such a great psychological effect. When we exchange positive emotions with another person, especially when we are the reason for those good impressions and states, we get back 4 to 10 times more. We gain more energy, and then we can send that fireball out into the world again and once more receive such a great emotional boost. Happiness is truly a habit. Happiness is always about sharing. It's somehow uncomfortable, unclear, and boring to be happy alone. But when you can experience these emotions with someone to share them, it's different. That's why I completely understand the pleasure you get when a woman leaves you with a smile on her face. Sometimes it even brings tears to your eyes. For example, I feel proud. Sometimes after hanging up, finishing a conversation, or letting someone go after a long therapy session, I even feel like crying because of that pride. And also because I was a part of it. So I'd like a medal too, please. But this joy that they succeeded, that I was somehow involved, that I witnessed it. Yes, of course, I have a very well trained, from all my endless trainings and higher education, a coach-like proper mindset to truly believe in a person, in the client, that they will succeed. If a person comes in, and I guess this applies to your work as well, when a patient comes to you, you genuinely believe they will succeed. You know they will. There's that confidence.
That they will succeed. If I don't think they will, I simply don't take them on. But if I do take them on, I know exactly what results we can achieve together. And when I often see results that are even better than what I originally planned, I genuinely feel so happy. I always say, in an ideal world where we didn't have to earn money, I would still do what I do because I truly enjoy it.
Yes, that's exactly how it works. It's actually a very psychological principle. When you truly believe that the person has come to you, they have the resources to solve their own situation, then the problem becomes a task to solve. And then through this channel, the effect of mirror neurons is transmitted and the person develops their own inner support. At first they lean on you, but then they develop their own state of being. And of course, there is a lot of pleasure, happiness, and joy in that. I really enjoy meeting and talking with people who are like me. It's the best job in the world. So thank you very much for this broadcast, for the podcast. This is such a new and interesting experience for me because before I used to think me and beauty and all those procedures or whatever beauty is about, those things were just at completely opposite ends of the room. But thanks to you, I'm already coming into contact with it, maybe not as often as you would like, but
as soon as you start coming to New York more often, you'll be exposed to it more often. But actually, Rita, even just looking at your face, I remember when you can show it, yes. And when you used to say, oh my God, I'll never do anything. That's not me at all. And I'm not a beautiful woman. Here I am sitting here looking at you. Yes, I remember that. You are a very beautiful woman. First, we worked a little on the pigmentation. Then we did a bit of moisturizing and then we did some lifting. Looking at you now, you are a beautiful woman. And again, we can always want better. But if you look at yourself today and compare it to when I first met you, it's like two different people.
I'm very grateful, including to you, thanks to your direct involvement.
It's all thanks to you because Diamond Aesthetics, remember how it started when you allowed me to work the way I want and not by someone else's rules.
Yes. That's exactly what it's called. Yes, that's what mutual support is all about. So when we give, we want to pass it on to someone else, right? Because there's this habit, this effect, this feedback when someone succeeds. Like putting a crown on another woman, you remember? That was a great ritual, right? And then you pass it on. About passing on this, your own
state. It was a very beautiful ritual. I actually even shared about it on my Instagram. And women wrote to me saying, you really do wear a crown. I said, well, I do wear it, actually. If people in New York didn't look at me strangely, honestly, I could tell you I would go out wearing a crown every day. And why not? But again, a crown is not just an accessory. A crown is your state of being. My goal, my mission is to help as many women as possible reach this state. And on my part, I can do something or help to reach this state faster and in a more harmonious way. Lidochka, thank you.
Thank you so much. A wonderful start. It was
very pleasant.
Yes, I really enjoyed it too. Wishing everyone a wonderful week. Please be happy and prosperous. Be sure to put on your crown from time to time or ask someone else to do it for you. It's a very effective ritual.
I can confirm that.
Take care. Have a great day. Bye.